Jake Morrison pressed his face against the small window of the transport ship and watched the massive space station grow larger ahead of them. Kepler Station Academy looked like a giant metal flower floating in the darkness of space. Its silver, petals stretched out in all directions, each one glowing with soft blue lights. Behind it, a huge gas giant painted the scene in swirls of orange and red. "First time seeing it?" asked the pilot, a friendly woman with gray hair. She had been quiet for most of the 3-day journey from Earth. "Yeah," Jake said, still staring. "It's bigger than I thought it would be." The pilot laughed. "Wait until you see the inside. They built that place to hold students from 40 different worlds. Some of those kids are twice your size." Jake felt his stomach flip. He was already nervous about being the first human student at the academy. Now he had to worry about giant alien classmates too. He touched the small bag beside his seat. It held everything he owned: some clothes, a picture of his family, and his father's old compass. Not much to start a new life with. The docking process took another hour. Jake watched through the window as mechanical arms grabbed their small ship and pulled it into a huge bay. Other ships were docked nearby, but they looked nothing like the ones from Earth. Some were shaped like crystals. Others looked like they were made of living metal that seemed to breathe. "Remember what they told you in training," the pilot said, as they prepared to leave the ship. "Don't touch anything you don't recognize. Don't eat anything unless they tell you it's safe for humans. And try not to break anything." Jake nodded. He had spent 6 months learning about alien cultures before they let him come here. The hardest part was learning that most alien species thought humans were dangerous primitives. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, which meant it was so hostile that most aliens couldn't survive there for even a day. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. Jake grabbed his bag and followed the pilot into the station. The first thing that hit him was the smell. Not bad, just different. Like metal and flowers and something he couldn't identify. The second thing was the size. The ceiling was at least 50 feet high, and the corridor stretched out so far he couldn't see the end. But what really made him stop and stare were the other beings walking around. A group of tall, thin creatures with blue skin glided past without making a sound. Their eyes were huge and black, and they wore flowing robes that seemed to move by themselves. Near an information desk, a being that looked like it was made of living crystal was talking to what appeared to be a floating jellyfish surrounded by a bubble of water. "Jake Morrison?" a voice said behind him. He turned to see another human walking toward him. The guy looked about his age, with brown hair and a friendly smile. He was wearing the academy uniform, a simple gray jumpsuit with the school symbol on the chest. "I'm Pete Williams," the guy said, extending his hand. "I've been here for a week. They asked me to show you around since I'm the only other human student." Jake shook his hand, relieved to meet someone from home. "How is it so far?" Pete's smile faded a little. "Honestly, it's tough. Most of the other students avoid us. Some of the teachers think we're too stupid to be here, and everyone acts like we're going to explode or attack them at any moment." They started walking down the corridor. Jake noticed how other students moved out of their way, giving them a wide space. Some stared openly, others whispered to their friends and pointed. "Why are they so scared of us?" Jake asked. "Because we're from a death world," Pete explained. "Most of these species evolved on planets where the biggest danger was maybe a mild rainstorm. They can't imagine living somewhere with predators, poisonous plants, natural disasters, and all the other stuff we deal with every day on Earth." They passed a group of 4-armed creatures who were at least 8 feet tall. Jake expected them to be intimidating, but they actually stepped aside and looked nervous when they saw the humans coming. "Those are Thorians," Pete said quietly. "They're incredibly strong. Each one of those arms can lift about 500 pounds. But their homeworld has almost no dangerous animals, so they've never had to fight for survival. They think we're all violent because we evolved alongside tigers and bears and sharks." Jake shook his head. "That's crazy. We're not violent." "Try telling them that," Pete said. "Last week in physics class, I mentioned that I went rock climbing back home. 3 students had to leave the room because they couldn't handle the idea of someone climbing up a cliff face for fun. They took a lift up to the residential level. The dormitory hallways were wide and well lit. with doors spaced far apart to accommodate different species' needs. Pete stopped at a door marked with symbols Jake couldn't read. "This is your room," Pete said, handing him a small device. "That's your translator and key. Your roommate should already be inside." Jake pressed the device against the door panel. It slid open to reveal a large room with 2 beds, 2 desks, and a big window showing the gas giant outside. Sitting at one of the desks was a being that looked like a 7-foot-tall insect with silver skin and compound eyes. The creature looked up when they entered and made a series of clicking sounds. Jake's translator turned the sounds into words. "You must be the human. I am Crix of the Thorian colony ship Brightstar. I have been assigned as your dormitory companion." "Nice to meet you," Jake said, trying to sound friendly. "I'm Jake Morrison from Earth." Crix's antennae twitched. "I have read about your species. Your world is classified as extremely hostile. How did you survive to adulthood?" Jake looked at Pete, who just shrugged. Carefully?" Jake said. "I see," Crix said, though he clearly didn't understand. "I will try to be a satisfactory roommate. Please inform me if you experience any violent urges so I may take appropriate safety measures." Pete patted Jake on the shoulder. "I'll let you get settled. Classes start tomorrow. Try to get some sleep. You'll need it." After Pete left, Jake unpacked his few belongings while Crix watched nervously from across the room. Every time Jake moved quickly or made a sudden sound, his roommate would flinch. When Jake pulled out his father's compass, Crix actually stood up and backed toward the door. "It's just a compass," Jake said, holding it up. "It helps you find direction." "A navigation device," Crix said, relaxing slightly. "But why is it so primitive? It appears to be made of metal and glass." Jake looked at the compass. It had belonged to his grandfather and his great-grandfather before that. The brass was worn smooth from years of use. "Sometimes the simple things work best," he said. "Fascinating," Crix said, though he still kept his distance. "On my world, all navigation is done by quantum computers. The idea of using magnetic fields seems very dangerous." Jake put the compass on his desk and lay down on his bed. Through the window, he could see stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds. Somewhere out there was Earth, with its blue oceans and white clouds and all the dangerous things that made it home. Tomorrow he would start classes at the most advanced school in the galaxy. He would sit next to beings from worlds he had never imagined. He would learn things that no human had ever learned before. But tonight, he was just a 17-year-old kid who missed his family and wondered if he had made a terrible mistake coming here. In the bed across the room, Crix made soft clicking sounds that the translator said were prayers for protection. Jake closed his eyes and tried not to laugh. If his roommate knew about the time Jake had camped alone in Grizzly Bear country, he would probably faint. This was going to be an interesting year. Jake's first morning at Kepler Station Academy started with an alarm that sounded like singing birds. He sat up in bed, confused for a moment about where he was. Then he saw Crix moving around the room on his 4 arms, getting ready for the day. "Good morning, Jake Morrison from Earth," Crix said. His translator made the clicking sounds into polite words. "I hope you did not experience any violent dreams during your sleep cycle." "Just normal dreams," Jake said, rubbing his eyes. "Thanks for asking." Crix seemed surprised that Jake was being friendly. Most of the alien students expected humans to be angry and mean all the time. Jake put on his gray academy uniform and followed Crix to the dining hall. The dining hall was enormous, with tables designed for dozens of different species. Some tables were very tall for the giant students. Others were close to the floor for small creatures that looked like walking mushrooms. In one corner, aquatic students sat in tanks filled with water. Jake got in line for food, trying not to stare at the other students. A group of crystal beings sat at one table, their bodies glowing softly as they ate what looked like colored sand. At another table, the tall blue creatures from yesterday were drinking something that sparkled like liquid starlight. "Human food is over there," Pete said, appearing beside him. He pointed to a small section with foods that looked almost normal. They had to special order everything from Earth. Most alien food would make us sick. Jake picked up some eggs, bread, and fruit that looked like apples but tasted like strawberries. He followed Pete to a table near the window. As they sat down, Jake noticed how quiet the dining hall became. Hundreds of alien students were stealing glances at the two humans. "They always stare like this?" Jake asked. "You'll get used to it," Pete said. "Wait until they see you in class. That's when things get really interesting." After breakfast, Jake followed his schedule to advanced stellar navigation. The classroom was huge, with desks arranged in a circle around a holographic star map that showed the entire galaxy. Jake found his assigned seat between a floating jellyfish creature and a being that looked like a walking tree. The other students whispered as he sat down. Jake heard his translator picking up fragments of their conversations. "Is that really a Deathworlder? I heard they eat the flesh of other creatures. My parents said their world has storms that can destroy cities. Look how small he is. How did his species survive?" Jake tried to ignore them and focused on his desk. It had strange symbols instead of buttons, and he couldn't figure out how to turn it on. The tree-like student next to him noticed his confusion. "You touch the activation symbol here," she said, pointing to a glowing mark. Her voice sounded like wind through leaves. "I am Zara of the Vectani Forest Cities. You are the human student everyone speaks of." "I'm Jake," he said, grateful for the help. "Nice to meet you." Zara's branches rustled in what might have been surprise. "You are quite polite for a savage species." Before Jake could respond, the classroom fell silent. A tall, bird-like creature walked to the center of the room. She had beautiful feathers that shifted from blue to green as she moved, and her large eyes seemed to look right through Jake. "I am Professor Kelthera," she announced. Her voice was sharp and clear. "This is Advanced Stellar Navigation, where you will learn to plot courses through hyperspace using 17-dimensional mathematics. This subject requires precise thinking and advanced mental capabilities." Her gaze landed directly on Jake. "I understand we have a student from a Class 12 Death World in our class. While I respect the diplomatic reasons for your presence here, I must warn you that this subject may be beyond the capabilities of a primitive species." Jake felt his face turn red, but he said nothing. Around the room, other students turned to stare at him again. "Let us begin with a simple problem," Professor Kelthera continued. She waved her wing, and the holographic star map changed to show a complex maze of colored lines. "Please calculate the optimal hyperspace route from Kepler Station to the Vegan Trade Hub, accounting for gravitational distortions, solar wind patterns, and quantum fluctuations in sectors 7 through 15. The alien students immediately began working at their desks, their fingers dancing over symbols that Jake couldn't read. Mathematical equations appeared in the air above their desks, full of symbols and numbers that hurt to look at. Jake stared at the problem for a moment. Back on Earth, his father had been a cargo pilot who flew between the colonies on Mars and the asteroid belt. Jake had spent hours in the cockpit, learning how to navigate through space using gravity wells and solar currents. This problem looked complicated, but the basic idea was the same. He started working, ignoring the fancy symbols and using the simple math his father had taught him. Instead of calculating every possible route, he looked for the path that made the most sense. He followed the natural flow of gravity and energy, the way a river finds the easiest path down a mountain. "Time," Professor Kelthera announced after 20 minutes. One by one, the alien students presented their solutions. Each answer involved hundreds of calculations and took several minutes to explain. Jake listened to the complex mathematical theories and started to worry that he had done something wrong. Finally, Professor Kelthera turned to him. "And what is your solution, human student?" Jake stood up, feeling nervous. His answer looked so simple compared to the others. "I think the best route goes through Sector 9, then curves around the neutron star in Sector 12, and uses its gravity to accelerate toward the trade hub." "That is your complete answer?" Professor Kelthera asked. Her feathers ruffled with what looked like amusement. "Well, yeah," Jake said. "It's the fastest way that doesn't waste fuel." The professor's large eyes narrowed. She turned to her computer and ran Jake's route through the navigation system. The holographic display showed a simple, curved line that avoided all the major obstacles and reached the destination in record time. The classroom became perfectly quiet. "This is impossible," Professor Kelthera muttered. She ran the calculation again. The answer was the same. Jake's simple solution was not only correct, it was better than any of the complex answers from the other students. "How did you calculate this without using the standard equations?" she demanded. Jake shrugged. "I just looked at it and figured out the easiest way to get there, like finding a path through the woods." Several alien students made sounds of confusion. Zara's branches rustled nervously. "You did not use mathematical formulas?" "Not really," Jake said. "I just used common sense." Professor Kelthera stared at him for a long moment. Then she waved her wing again, and an even more complex problem appeared on the holographic display. "Very well. Perhaps that was too simple. Try this one." This new problem involved navigating through a dangerous nebula filled with energy storms and unstable wormholes. The alien students looked terrified just reading the description. Some of them started to complain that the problem was too difficult. Jake studied the display for a few minutes. The nebula looked chaotic and dangerous, but he could see patterns in the chaos. The energy storms moved in predictable cycles. The wormholes opened and closed like breathing. It reminded him of weather patterns back on Earth. He worked quickly, plotting a course that danced between the dangers like a ship sailing through a storm. When he finished, he had a route that not only avoided all the hazards, but actually used the energy storms to boost speed. "Done," he said. Professor Kelthera's beak fell open. She checked his answer and found it was perfect again. Around the room, alien students whispered in amazement and fear. "This is extraordinary," Zara said quietly. "How do you see solutions that our computers cannot find?" Jake looked around at all the staring faces. "I guess growing up on a dangerous world teaches you to think differently," he said. "When everything around you is trying to kill you, you learn to find the safe path pretty quickly." The bell rang, ending the class. As students filed out, Jake heard them talking in excited voices about the human who could solve impossible problems by just looking at them. Professor Kelthera watched him leave with a thoughtful expression on her bird-like face. Jake met Pete in the hallway. "How did your first class go?" Pete asked. "Weird," Jake said. "I think I accidentally made everyone think humans are really good at math." Pete laughed. "Wait until they see what you can do in physical education class." As they walked to their next class, Jake noticed that the other students were no longer avoiding him. Now they followed at a distance, whispering and pointing. He wasn't sure if that was better or worse. What he didn't know was that news of his performance was already spreading through the station. By lunchtime, every student and teacher would know about the human who could navigate hyperspace using nothing but instinct and common sense. The galaxy was about to learn that there was more than one kind of intelligence. Jake's third day at the academy started like the others, but something felt different. As he walked through the hallways, more students stared at him than before. Some looked curious instead of afraid. Others whispered to their friends and pointed when they thought he wasn't looking. "You're famous now," Pete said as they walked to breakfast. "Everyone's talking about how you solve those navigation problems. Half the students think you're some kind of genius. The other half think it was just luck." Jake didn't feel like a genius. He felt tired and homesick. Last night, Crix had asked him dozens of questions about how human brains worked. His roommate couldn't understand how Jake could solve problems without using computers or complex math. "It's not that special," Jake said. "Anyone from Earth could have done the same thing." "That's what makes it special," Pete replied. "These aliens have never met anyone who thinks the way we do." They sat at their usual table in the dining hall. Jake noticed that Zara, the tree-like student from his navigation class, was sitting alone at a nearby table. She kept looking in their direction. "I think she wants to talk to you," Pete said. Jake walked over to Zara's table. Up close, he could see that her bark-like skin had intricate patterns carved into it, and her leaves shimmered with different colors. May I sit with you? He asked. Zara's branches rustled in surprise. You wish to sit with me? But I am not of your species. That's okay, Jake said, sitting down. I'm still learning about everyone here. I have been thinking about yesterday's class, Zara said. Her voice sounded worried. Professor Kelthera gave you problems that senior students struggle with, yet you solved them as if they were simple puzzles. How is this possible? Jake thought about how to explain it. On Earth, we have to solve problems quickly or we might die. If you're being chased by a predator, you don't have time for complicated math. You just have to find the fastest way to safety. Your world truly sounds terrifying, Zara said. On my world, the greatest danger is when the seasons change too quickly. Even then, we have months to prepare. What's the scariest thing that ever happened to you? Jake asked. Zara's leaves turned a darker shade of green. Once, when I was young, I fell from my tree during a windstorm. I was injured and couldn't climb back up for several hours. My family was very worried. Jake nodded seriously, but inside, he was amazed. Zara's worst experience would barely count as an interesting afternoon back on Earth. He remembered the time he got lost in the mountains during a blizzard and had to build a shelter to survive the night. His parents had been proud of him for staying calm and thinking clearly. What about you? Zara asked. What was your most frightening experience? Jake thought for a moment. Probably when I was camping with my dad and a bear came into our campsite, looking for food. We had to stay perfectly still for 2 hours while it searched around our tent. Zara's branches went completely rigid. A bear? That is one of your world's predators, correct? How large are they? About 8 feet tall when they stand up, Jake said. But this one wasn't really dangerous, it just wanted our food, not us. Not dangerous? Zara's voice rose to a squeak. An 8-foot predator is not dangerous? Several other students at nearby tables turned to look at them. Jake realized he had said something wrong again. Well, it could have been dangerous, he said quickly. But bears usually leave you alone if you don't threaten them. The really dangerous ones are the small animals, like spiders and snakes. Small animals are more dangerous than large ones? Zara asked. Some of them. We have spiders that can kill you with one bite, and snakes that can strike faster than you can see. Zara made a sound like wind through dead leaves. I think I need to lie down. Your world sounds like a nightmare. Jake felt bad for scaring her. It's not that bad once you know what to look for. Most dangerous animals try to avoid humans anyway. After breakfast, Jake went to his interspecies history class. The teacher was Chancellor Vorn himself, a dignified alien who looked like a cross between a lizard and a lion. His scales were golden, and his mane flowed behind him as he walked. Today we will discuss the different ways species have adapted to their environments, Chancellor Vorn announced. Some species developed advanced technology to overcome natural challenges. Others developed physical adaptations like enhanced strength or specialized organs. He gestured to the holographic display, which showed images of different alien worlds. The Thorians developed forearms to better manipulate their environment. The Aquari learned to live both in water and in artificial atmosphere bubbles. The Vectani formed symbiotic relationships with their forest ecosystems. The display changed to show Earth. Jake felt a pang of homesickness seeing the blue oceans and white clouds of his home world. And then we have Class 12 Deathworlds, Chancellor Vorn continued. These planets are so hostile that most species would consider them uninhabitable. The few species that evolve on such worlds develop very different survival strategies. Jake noticed that every student in the class had turned to look at him. He tried to sink lower in his chair. Can anyone tell me what makes a death world so dangerous? Chancellor Vorn asked. A Thorian student raised one of his forearms. Extreme weather patterns, unstable geology, and aggressive fauna. Correct. And what would you expect from a species that evolved on such a world? They would be highly aggressive and violent, said a crystalline student. They would need to be to survive. That is the common assumption, Chancellor Vorn agreed. But our human students have shown us something unexpected. They have adapted not through aggression, but through remarkable problem-solving abilities and stress tolerance. Jake wished he could disappear. Everyone was staring at him again. Mr. Morrison, Chancellor Vorn said, would you share with the class how humans typically respond to dangerous situations? Jake stood up reluctantly. We try to stay calm and think of solutions, he said. Getting scared or angry usually makes things worse. And how do you learn these skills? The Chancellor asked. Practice, I guess. My dad started teaching me survival skills when I was little. By the time I was 10, I could start a fire, find clean water, and build a shelter. The classroom erupted in gasps and whispers. A jellyfish-like student floated higher in its bubble, clearly agitated. You were taught combat skills as a child? It asked through its translator. Not combat, Jake said. Survival. There's a difference. What is the difference? Chancellor Vorn asked, looking genuinely curious. Jake thought about it. Combat is about fighting other people or animals. Survival is about working with your environment to stay alive. Most of the time, the best survival strategy is to avoid fighting altogether. Fascinating, the Chancellor murmured. Can you give us an example? Sure. If you're lost in the woods, you don't fight the forest. You read the signs it gives you. Moss grows on the north side of trees. Water flows downhill toward rivers. Birds fly toward their nests before dark. If you pay attention, the forest will show you the way home. The students looked confused. To them, nature was something to be controlled with technology, not something to cooperate with. Chancellor Vorn was about to ask another question when the lights in the classroom flickered. A low rumble shook the station and several students cried out in alarm. What was that? Someone asked. The lights flickered again, and this time, they stayed dim. The comfortable hum of the life support systems changed to a higher, more urgent sound. Chancellor Vorn's expression grew serious. He touched a communication device on his wrist. Bridge, this is the Chancellor. What is our status? The reply crackled with static. Sir, we're experiencing a major solar flare from the local star. It's much stronger than predicted. Primary systems are being affected. As if to emphasize the point, the artificial gravity fluctuated. Jake felt his stomach lurch as his weight changed for a moment. Around the room, several students who were adapted to specific gravity levels began to show signs of distress. Solar flare? Zara whispered. But the weather prediction system said there would be no solar activity for weeks. Prediction systems can be wrong, Jake said quietly. On Earth, we always have backup plans for when the weather turns bad. The lights went out completely for several seconds before emergency lighting kicked in. The room was now bathed in an eerie red glow. The air circulation system made a grinding noise and then stopped. Chancellor Vorn tried his communicator again. Bridge, do we need to initiate evacuation procedures? The static was worse now. Sir, primary systems failing, backup power at 60%. Evacuation shuttles are offline. Estimate 6 hours until rescue ships can reach us. The translation ended in a burst of static. Chancellor Vorn's face went pale. Around the classroom, students began to panic. The Aquari student's water bubble started to bubble and steam as its temperature regulation failed. The crystalline students were making high-pitched ringing sounds that hurt to hear. Even the large Thorian students looked frightened. 6 hours? One of them said. Most of us cannot survive that long without proper life support. Jake looked around the room at his panicking classmates. The emergency lighting was getting dimmer. The air was already starting to feel stale. And somewhere in the distance he could hear the sound of metal creaking under stress. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Jake felt completely at home. This was exactly the kind of... Jake stood up in the middle of the panicking classroom and took a deep breath. The emergency lights cast everything in red shadows, making the alien students look even more frightened than they already were. The air was getting warmer and stuffier by the minute. Everyone needs to calm down, Jake said in a clear, steady voice. Chancellor Vorn turned to look at him. Mr. Morrison, please sit down. This is not the time for... Yes, it is, Jake interrupted. He had never interrupted a teacher before, but this was an emergency. Panicking uses up oxygen faster. If we only have 6 hours of air, we need to conserve it. The Chancellor stared at him for a moment, then nodded slowly. What do you suggest? Jake looked around the room, thinking quickly. His father had always taught him that in an emergency, the first step was to assess the situation. What resources did they have? What were the biggest dangers? What needed to be fixed first? First, we need to help the students who are in immediate danger, Jake said. He pointed to the Aquari student whose water bubble was now steaming badly. Her water is overheating, and the crystalline students are cracking from the temperature changes. But how can we help them? Zara asked. Her leaves were wilting from the rising heat. Jake walked over to one of the desks and pushed it hard. It scraped across the floor with a loud screech. Several students jumped at the noise. These desks are bolted down, but the bolts are loose, Jake said. If we can move some of them, we can create a cooler area near the ventilation shafts. A Thorian student shook his head. Those desks are too heavy. It would take 4 of us to move one. Jake grabbed the desk he had just pushed and lifted it completely off the floor. The alien students gasped as he carried it across the room like it weighed nothing. How is that possible? The Thorian whispered. Earth gravity is stronger than most worlds, Jake explained, setting the desk down. We're used to carrying heavy things. He quickly moved 3 more desks, creating a sheltered area near an air vent that was still working weakly. Bring the Aquari student here, he told Chancellor Vorn. The airflow will help cool her water. While the Chancellor and another student carefully moved the overheating Aquari, Jake knelt down and examined the ventilation grate. The screws were loose, probably from the vibrations caused by the solar flare. Does anyone have something I can use as a screwdriver, he asked. Why do you need to remove the vent cover? Chancellor Vorn asked. The airflow is blocked, Jake said. Something's stuck in there. If I can clear it out, we'll get better ventilation. A crystalline student handed him a thin metal stylus from her desk. Jake used it to remove the screws and pulled off the vent cover. Inside the duct, a piece of metal debris was blocking most of the airflow. I can reach it, Jake said, sticking his arm into the duct. The metal edges were sharp, but he ignored the scratches on his skin. A few seconds later, he pulled out a twisted piece of metal plating. Immediately, cool air began flowing more freely into the room. The Aquari student's water stopped steaming, and several other students sighed with relief. Remarkable, Chancellor Vorn said. But Mr. Morrison, you're bleeding. Jake looked at his arm. The scratches were deeper than he had thought, and blood was dripping onto the floor. Several alien students made sounds of horror. It's just a few cuts, Jake said. They'll heal. You're not in pain? Zara asked. Her voice sounded amazed and terrified at the same time. It hurts a little, Jake admitted, but not enough to worry about. The truth was, the cuts hurt quite a bit. But Jake had learned long ago that showing pain only made other people panic more. On Earth, you dealt with injuries quickly and quietly. We need to do something about the power, Jake continued. The emergency lights won't last much longer. As if he had jinxed it, the lights flickered and dimmed even more. Now the room was barely brighter than twilight. The backup power core is failing, Chancellor Vorn said. But there's nothing we can do about that. Only trained engineers are allowed near the power systems. Where is it? Jake asked. Mr. Morrison, absolutely not. The radiation levels near a failing power core would be lethal to any organic being. Jake thought about what his father had told him about radiation. Earth's atmosphere was thin compared to most worlds, so humans were exposed to more cosmic radiation just from living there. They had evolved to handle radiation levels that would kill most alien species. How lethal? Jake asked. Chancellor Vorn consulted a device on his wrist. Current radiation levels near the power core are at 300 rems per hour. Exposure to more than 50 rems would be fatal to most species. Jake did some quick math in his head. 300 rems was a lot, but not immediately deadly to a human. He would have maybe an hour before it became dangerous, and only 15 minutes to reset the power core. I can handle that level for a short time, Jake said. That's impossible, a Thorian student protested. No organic being can survive that much radiation. Humans can, Jake said simply. Our world doesn't have a thick atmosphere like most planets. We're used to radiation. Chancellor Vorn stared at him. Even if that's true, you don't know how to repair a power core. Maybe not, Jake said. "But I know how to turn things off and on again. Sometimes that's all you need." The lights flickered again and went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, but it was much dimmer than before. In the red glow, Jake could see that several students were starting to have trouble breathing. "We're running out of time," Jake said. "Where's the power core?" Chancellor Vorn hesitated for a long moment. Then he pulled up a holographic map on his wrist device. "Maintenance shaft 7, 2 levels down. But Mr. Morrison, I cannot allow you to—" "You can't stop me," Jake said. It wasn't a threat, just a statement of fact. This is what humans do. We fix things that are broken even if it's dangerous. He walked to the classroom door, which had sealed itself when the emergency started. The manual release was stuck, probably from the temperature changes. Jake grabbed the handle and pulled hard. The door groaned and then opened with a loud crack. The handle was not designed to withstand that much force, Chancellor Vorn said faintly. "I'll be back in 30 minutes, Jake said. "Keep everyone calm, and keep them breathing slowly." "Jake, wait," Zara called out. "Why are you doing this? You barely know us." Jake paused at the doorway. "Because you're my classmates," he said, "and because this is what my species does when people are in trouble." He stepped into the dark corridor outside. The emergency lighting here was even dimmer, and he could hear the sound of stressed metal echoing through the station. Somewhere, in the distance, alarms were wailing. Jake started running toward the maintenance shafts. He had studied the station's layout during his first week, and he remembered seeing the power core access points. The corridors were empty except for the occasional maintenance robot that sparked and twitched from radiation damage. He found maintenance shaft 7 and pried open the access hatch. Inside, a ladder led down into darkness. Jake could feel the heat radiating up from below, and his skin tingled from the radiation exposure. "Just like fixing the generator back home," he muttered to himself and started climbing down. At the bottom of the shaft, the power core hummed and sparked behind a thick, transparent barrier. Warning lights flashed everywhere, and the radiation detector on the wall was reading numbers that would terrify any sane person. Jake ignored the warnings and started looking for the manual reset controls. Back on Earth, every piece of important equipment had a simple way to restart it when the computers failed. This alien technology had to have something similar. He found a panel marked with universal warning symbols and pried it open. Inside were 3 large switches and a big red button labeled in several alien languages. His translator told him it said "Emergency Core Reset." "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways," Jake said, and pressed the button. The power core made a loud grinding noise, went completely dark for 5 seconds, and then roared back to life. Lights came on throughout the maintenance area, and Jake could hear the sound of ventilation systems starting up again. He climbed back up the ladder as fast as he could. His skin felt hot and itchy from the radiation, but he was still alive and moving. By the time he got back to the classroom, the normal lights were on and cool air was flowing again. The alien students stared at him in complete silence as he walked through the door. "Power's back on," Jake announced. "Air should be getting better soon." Chancellor Vorn looked at his radiation detector and went pale. "Mr. Morrison, you've been exposed to enough radiation to kill 10 Thorians. "But I'm not a Thorian," Jake said. "I'm human." He sat down at his desk, trying not to show how tired he suddenly felt. Around the room, his classmates continued to stare at him like he was some kind of miracle. Outside the window, rescue ships were already approaching the station, but everyone in the classroom knew that without Jake's quick thinking and willingness to risk his life, many of them wouldn't have lived to see them arrive. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Jake felt like he belonged there. The rescue ships arrived 2 hours later, but by then the crisis was over. Jake sat in the academy's medical bay while a robot doctor scanned him for radiation damage. The machine beeped and clicked as it worked, making worried sounds that his translator couldn't interpret. "This is most unusual," said Dr. Vex, the station's chief medical officer. She was a tall, thin alien with 6 arms and skin that changed colors when she was thinking. Right now, she was a worried shade of purple. "You should be very sick from the radiation exposure, but your body seems to be handling it without any problems." "I feel fine," Jake said, which was mostly true. He was tired and his cut stung a little, but nothing worse than after a long day of hiking back home. This suggests that human physiology is remarkably resistant to radiation damage, Dr. Vex continued. Much more so than we realized. I will need to update the medical files for your species. Through the medical bay window, Jake could see groups of students gathering in the hallways. They kept looking toward the medical bay and talking in excited voices. Word of what had happened was spreading quickly through the station. They want to see you, Dr. Vex said, noticing his gaze. You have become quite famous, Mr. Morrison. Several news organizations are requesting interviews. I don't want to be famous, Jake said. I just did what anyone would do. Dr. Vex's skin shifted to a surprised yellow color. Anyone? Mr. Morrison, what you did today was impossible for 99% of the species in this galaxy. You walked into a radiation field that would have killed most beings in minutes. You lifted objects that would require mechanical assistance for most students, and you solved the crisis using simple, practical thinking instead of advanced technology. Before Jake could respond, the medical bay door opened. Pete walked in, followed by Chancellor Vorn, Professor Kelthera, Zara, Crix, and several other students from Jake's classes. They all looked at him with expressions he had never seen before, a mixture of awe, gratitude, and something that might have been respect. How are you feeling? Pete asked. Okay, Jake said. Just tired. The radiation levels you were exposed to would have killed me instantly, Crix said. His compound eyes reflected the medical bay lights as he spoke. Yet you appear completely unharmed. I do not understand how this is possible. Humans are tougher than we look, Jake said with a small smile. It is more than that, Professor Kelthera said. She stepped forward, her feathers now a soft blue instead of their usual proud green. I owe you an apology, Mr. Morrison. I believed that intelligence could only be measured by complex calculations and advanced theoretical knowledge. Today you showed me that there is another kind of intelligence, the ability to see simple solutions to complex problems. You don't need to apologize, Jake said. You were just doing your job. No, Professor Kelthera said firmly. I was allowing prejudice to cloud my judgment. I looked at your species and saw only primitives from a dangerous world. I failed to see that surviving on such a world would create unique strengths. Chancellor Vorn cleared his throat. Mr. Morrison, I have received several communications in the past hour. The Galactic Education Council wants to expand the human exchange program immediately. 3 different universities have offered you full scholarships, and the Galactic Emergency Response Corps has invited you to join their training program. Jake blinked in surprise. I just fixed a power core. It wasn't that big a deal. To you, perhaps, Chancellor Vorn said, but to the rest of us it was extraordinary. You remained calm in a crisis that paralyzed beings with advanced degrees in emergency management. You solved problems that our computers could not handle, and you risked your life to save classmates you had known for only 3 days. That's what people do, Jake said. When someone needs help, you help them. Zara's branches rustled softly. Not all people, Jake Morrison from Earth. On my world, we debate for days before making important decisions. We form committees and run computer simulations. The idea of one person taking immediate action to save others, it is not how we think. But maybe it should be, said a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Lisa Parker, the human, art student Jake had met briefly on his first day. She was carrying a tablet that showed news feeds from across the galaxy. The story is everywhere, she said, showing them the screen. Human student saves alien academy. Deathworlder heroes in space. The first human scholar proves his species' worth. News crews are coming from 6 different systems to interview you. Jake groaned. I really don't want to be on the news. Too late, Lisa said with a grin. You're famous across the galaxy now. But look at this part. She scrolled to a section showing interviews with alien leaders and scientists. Jake watched, as after being praised human ingenuity, courage, and selflessness. Many admitted they had misjudged Earth and its people. The Thorian Council voted to establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth, Lisa read. The Vectani Forest Parliament wants to send botanists to study Earth's ecosystems, and the Aquari Collective is offering to share their medical technology in exchange for human emergency response training. All because you fixed a power core, Pete said, shaking his head in amazement. It was not just the power core, Chancellor Vorn said. It was how you approached the entire crisis. You assessed the situation quickly, prioritized the most urgent needs, and found practical solutions using available resources. These are skills that most species never develop, because we rely too heavily on technology and committee decisions. Dr. Vex finished her scans and announced that Jake was cleared to leave. As they walked back toward the dormitories, students lined the hallways to watch them pass. But instead of the fearful stares Jake had gotten used to, these looks were different. Some students nodded respectfully, others smiled shyly. A few even tried to approach him before being stopped by their nervous friends. They're not afraid of you anymore, Zara observed. No, Jake said. Now they think I'm some kind of superhero. I'm not sure which is worse. Give them time, Pete said. They'll figure out that you're just a normal guy who happens to be from a tough world. When they reached Jake's dormitory room, Crix was waiting outside. His forearms were full of what looked like gifts from other students. Artwork, books, and small devices that Jake couldn't identify. These are for you, Crix said. Students have been bringing them all afternoon. They wish to show their gratitude. That's very nice of them, Jake said. But I don't need gifts. I was just helping my classmates. That is exactly why they want to give them to you, Crix said. On my world, we have a saying. The greatest honor is not in receiving help, but in giving it freely. Today you gave help freely to beings you barely knew, asking nothing in return. Jake opened the door to their room and set the gifts on his desk. Through the window he could see Earth's sun as a tiny star in the distance. It seemed impossible that just a week ago he had been worried about fitting in at an alien school. Crix, Jake said, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you still afraid of me? Crix was quiet for a moment, his antennae twitching thoughtfully. I am not afraid of you, Jake Morrison from Earth, but I am amazed by you. Today I learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. I saw you face dangers that would terrify my entire species, and you did it to protect others. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Crix said firmly. Not anyone. Today you showed us what it means to be human, and I think the galaxy is better for knowing. That night, Jake lay in bed looking out at the stars. His tablet showed dozens of messages from news organizations, universities, and government officials. Pete had told him that enrollment applications from human students had increased by 3,000% in just one day. But the message that meant the most to him was a simple video from his family back on Earth. His parents and his little sister Amy were sitting in their kitchen, looking proud and slightly overwhelmed. We saw the news, his father said. The whole world is talking about what you did. But we want you to know that we're not surprised. You've been solving problems and helping people your whole life. That's just who you are. We miss you, his mother added. But we're so proud of you for showing everyone what humans are really like. His sister Amy grinned at the camera. My brother's famous. Wait until I tell everyone at school that my brother saved a space station. Jake smiled and closed the tablet. Tomorrow there would be more interviews, more classes, and more chances to learn about the galaxy beyond Earth. But tonight he was just a 17-year-old kid who had made some new friends and helped them when they needed it. Outside his window, rescue ships were still arriving at the station, but the crisis was over. The students were safe, and for the first time in galactic history, humans were no longer seen as dangerous primitives from a death world. They were seen as heroes. And maybe, Jake thought as he drifted off to sleep, that was just the beginning.